I was sitting in bed and I was bawling, and all of a sudden I literally, the only way to describe it is that I was enveloped in comfort and in warmth. And I cried and I said, why did you leave me? Why did you have to go? You know, I know you had to. Obviously, God has bigger plans for you, but I'm angry at you that you left, even though I kind of understand why you did.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, either I heard him or I felt him telling me that it was going to be okay. And I also felt him starting to leave. And I told him that. I said, I can feel you leaving, but I want you to know how much I love you and how much I miss you. And I hope you come back, and I will see you again soon. Hopefully not too soon, but eventually I will see you again.
Yeah.
And it was truly, truly one of the single most beautiful experiences of my life.
Have you ever thought about your meaning of life?
What is our purpose here? You're listening to CatharSIS, a podcast about the meaning of life, created by two sisters who are in the field of marriage and family therapy.
Hello, my name is Michal.
And I'm Maayan.
This podcast was created in honor of our dad, who was a hematologist-oncologist, a medical doctor who would always ask everyone and anyone, what is the meaning of life?
It's a personal yet relatable podcast where we interview people and have discussions about the meaning of life, of course, as well as friendships, relationships, love, nostalgia, how to cope with an existential crisis, and normalizing grief and death.
So we have Wendei Melnick Smith with us on our podcast, and we are going to be interviewing you, Wendei.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I just feel incredibly honored to be a part of this. And I love that you are two women and two sisters doing this together, because you hear of so many siblings. I'm not, sadly, I just disowned my brother this year for many reasons that we can talk about at another time. So it's such a blessing. Like, my kids are very, very close, even though they're almost 5 years apart. So it's just amazing to me to see two sisters that get along and love each other so much, that are able to actually work together without killing each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's work. Like all relationships, it's work. So, yeah, we actually had some questions for you. First of all, who are you and how do we know you?
Well, that's a great story. So, again, I'm Wendei Melnick Smith, and I'm actually an LA native, and we know each other through your dad. And, crazy story. At the beginning of 2017, or actually the end of 2016, my immune system crashed. And most of my life, like since I can remember being a little kid, I had a lot of weird things. I had insomnia as a child, and I started having migraines at age 12. I thought that it was just puberty and, getting my period, and, all kind of like the normal things. And as I got into my 20s, weird things. Again, the migraines kept getting worse and worse and worse. My neck started hurting me. And in my early 30s, I actually was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, which, who the heck in their 30s gets degenerative disc disease, right? I remember my pain management specialist used to get excited when I came in, because he would say, oh my gosh, I love doing your injections. And I said, why? And he said, because most of my clients are between 80 and dead. And he said, I can actually see what I'm doing with you under the fluoroscopy, the x-ray. So as time went on, things got worse and worse. And at 34, I had my very first bout of true clinical depression and panic attacks. And, it drives me nuts when people say, oh, go for a walk and exercise. Because if you have true clinical depression, you are basically like paralyzed. You have zero control of your mind. You have zero control of your body. And when I was getting panic attacks, I literally felt like I was being buried alive. it was scary as hell. And I lost about 20 pounds in a few months. And in the meantime, I had actually moved to New York for a year. So I lived in New York City, 1993, 1994. And when I got home, I actually made a career change. I had started in entertainment. I was a producer and development executive for about 9 years. And when I moved back to Los Angeles, I say that I quit the boyfriend and I quit my job and moved back home with my tail between my legs. And I got a facial and massage one day at a well-known day spa in California. And I remember in that moment, it was like, wow, what a cool way to make money. And I had already decided that I didn't want to work for anybody, because back then in the 90s, all of the female network executives and producers were just bitches. You know, they had to basically assume that type of personality to survive. I mean, it was a very hardcore industry. And, you know, things have obviously changed with the Me Too movement. So I decided that I was going to produce independently, but I went back to school to do skincare. And of course, everybody thought I was completely nuts because I was such a workaholic. And as soon as I got my hands on somebody, I knew that this was what I was supposed to be doing. And classic codependent that I am, it was perfect for me, you know, to be touching people and nurturing and taking care of people and obviously changing their skin. And I really wanted to make a difference. And one of my clients, I think my second year of being an esthetician, was a woman by the name of Dr. Francine Hamburg, who is an infectious disease specialist. And she started coming to me at one of my various jobs before I started my own business 2 years after I got my license. And she knew me very, very well. She knew me when I was married to my first husband, before I was pregnant with my daughter. So, I mean, we go back, it's really, I think 24 years now we go back. And she started to see a difference in me in 2012. In 2012, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And I believed the diagnosis because I had heard that it was hereditary. And my mother, who grew up in Montreal, was diagnosed with fibromyalgia about 30 years ago. So I believed my diagnosis. And Francine kept begging me to test for Lyme. And I kept telling her that she was nuts because, to my knowledge, I'd never been bit by a tick. And at that point, I was as ignorant as most of the world, not knowing that it's sexually transmitted, that you can... that it crosses the placenta and all of that. And sadly, I think, you know, I passed it to both my children, not knowing. So, you know, the joke was on me. She happened to see me the end of 2016. It was the year that Christmas Eve fell on the first night of Hanukkah. So I threw a Christmas/Hanukkah party, and I had gotten down to 85 pounds at that point. And she begged me to come in and let her test me. And basically, just to humor her, I did. And I was positive, and I didn't realize what I was getting into until I watched a documentary on Amazon called Under Our Skin, and it was scary as hell. And I realized that I had entered like this whole new world. And so I started treating with her, and I found out that I was severely anemic. So I went to another hematologist who was giving me iron bags. And Francine said to me one day, you know, you need to meet my friend, Dr. Bick, because he does all these IVs and vitamin C and different things. And I don't know how he does it, but he's able to get it all covered by insurance, and he really wants to meet you. So that's how I met your dad. And I remember going to him for the first time in the Encino office. And we had our, you know, private meeting in a private room. And he said to me, I want to learn about Lyme. I've been doing cancer for over 30 years. I'm bored with cancer. Bring me Lyme patients. And so I did. And he would take us to lunch, to dinner, and he would pick our brains. And he loved meeting us. And, you know, every Wednesday morning at 9 or 9:30, I was there. And we called it the Wednesday morning infusion party. And we had planned on doing a sitcom about it. And that literally became my social life. So I was juggling work and treating, and I truly looked forward to my Wednesday mornings because I got to hang out with my friends, and obviously your dad, who told really bad jokes. And he would sing and blast his music and talk politics, and I'd have to tell him to be quiet, but that's how we got to know each other.
That's one of the things that I know my sisters and I all loved about our dad is just how close he was with patients. And, my dad used to call this touching of the souls. That's one of the things he loved about being a medical doctor in oncology was this touching of the souls, this human connection that you're describing. So with that, through everything that you've gone through in your life, through everything that you've experienced, that you're currently experiencing, how would you define your meaning of life? What is the meaning of life for you?
It's such an existential question, right? Because everybody has their own meaning. And for me, the entire meaning of life changed in a heartbeat when I got sick. And as I started to learn and I became part of a Facebook group in Los Angeles, and I got really involved with the community and I learned more and I learned how politicized my diseases are, the meaning of life truly shifted to me wanting to be a voice for others. And I truly believe that every person that's born into this world is here for a reason. And it's not just about us. It's about how can we be of service to others. And I have been, most of my life, again, classic codependent, but I've truly made it my mission in life to spread awareness. And people get sick of it, I'm sure, but I've learned to use my voice. And I think for me, the meaning of life is to use your time here wisely, to be a voice and to do good things while you're here. Because, as we've seen with this whole COVID thing, and even before, life can be gone in just a second.
Right. Yeah. That's a beautiful perspective.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for sharing your story on how you met our dad. We actually met you through our dad, and your story has been really inspiring because you went through so much and you faced the existential part of life.
Your dad literally saved my life. I mean, he was such an influence in my life and still is. I mean, just because he's not physically here, I mean, my God, he's your dad. I mean, that's the stuff that I learned from him and our conversations, like they're going to last a lifetime and beyond, obviously. But I had gone for stem cell treatment a little over 2 years ago for the first time in Cabo. And I had a port at the time and I was going to go accessed. And I had tried to get a hold of one of my favorite nurses to come and access me myself because I had never done it. And the message didn't get passed on to her. So I remembered stupidly, I was in my bathroom and trying to create a sterile environment, which is absolutely freaking ridiculous because you cannot create a sterile environment in a bathroom, obviously. And I ended up having a fight with my husband. I mean, in a retrospect, it was so freaking stupid, but I had a roll of paper towels on the bathtub and he went to touch the paper towels and he didn't have gloves on. And I screamed, "Don't touch the paper towels." And he just lost his shit and started screaming at me and went out in the backyard and he left. And I don't really remember what happened. And I may have actually dropped the needle and grabbed it and didn't, put alcohol on it or grab a new one. And I accessed myself, thought I did a really good job in spite of sobbing. And I started having issues with it in Cabo, so we stopped using it. And a week after I got home, I went and saw your dad, and I'm sitting in the infusion room, and I could feel my temperature rising, and I started having the chills. And he said, "You're having Rigers." And he called the nurse and started yelling, "Get some cultures out of her." And the next morning he called me and he said, "The cultures are coming back. They're not good. You need to get started on antibiotics." So I said, "Okay, do you have the number to CVS?" And he just started laughing And he said, no, you need to get to the office right now. You need IV antibiotics. And, I had my port removed a week later. And I remember the following week, again, we were sitting in a room together, and he looked at me very serious. And he said, Wendei, this could have gone very different. And I knew what he meant. And he kept me out of the hospital. I treated in his office for 3 days.
So in terms of your experience with facing death, what would you say your perception about death is now as a result of what you've gone through?
Well, you know what? It's really changed a lot. And it actually changed prior to that experience. I think like most people, and people don't talk about it very often, I was terrified of death. I grew up with my dad's still alive, knock on wood, he's 82. And I grew up with my father saying, there is no life after death. It's ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And so my entire adult, childhood and teenage years and adult years up until the end of 2000, sometime in 2014, I truly believed that was it. And I had a very gloom and doom attitude about death, that was it. When you're dead, you're dead. And the organization AISH. In 2014, I applied to be on this woman's birthright trip to Israel. And I ended up getting waitlisted, and I ended up getting on. So prior to that, I started going to some classes. And coincidentally, the very first class that I went to was Judaism. It was called Judaism in the Afterlife. And I remember going to that class and learning that, like in the Saturday Minions, I forget how many times, like 14 times or something, they actually mentioned the afterlife in the Minion. And I was really blown away by that. And I remember at one point I had to go to the bathroom, and there was like some wicker boxes kind of stacked up in this woman's bathroom. I think it was in Encino. And there was each one of them had like a little phrase on it. And one of them said this and that. And my father's sister, my Auntie Ruthie, who was a hoot, she was the bra buyer for Fredericks of Hollywood from the beginning, and she was amazing. But she and her husband many years ago used to own a little store in North Hollywood called This and That. And I felt like it was a sign that she was there. And knowing that Judaism believed in an afterlife was so amazing to me that everything shifted. And I learned that when we pray for the dead, that we're elevating their soul. And I was taught that heaven is really kind of like a theater, and that there's different levels. And again, each time we say, somebody's name or we pray for them, we're literally elevating their soul. And it really brought me a lot of comfort. And in fact, I had emailed you. I was in a really dark place about 4 or 5 nights ago, and your dad came and visited me. And that's literally never happened before. My Auntie Ruthie, the one that I just told you about, she visited me one night in a dream, but I've never literally felt somebody like while I was awake come to me, and he did.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with that?
Yeah, I was sitting in bed and I was bawling, and all of a sudden I literally, the only way to describe it is that I was enveloped in comfort and in warmth. And I don't remember if he spoke to me. I did, big mouth that I am. I was the one that did most of the speaking. And I cried and I said, why did you leave me? Why did you have to go? I know you had to. Obviously, God has bigger plans for you. But I'm angry at you that you left, even though I kind of understand why you did. And I just, either I heard him or I felt him telling me that it was going to be okay. And I also felt him starting to leave. And I told him that. I said, I can feel you leaving, but I want you to know how much I love you and how much I miss you. And I hope you come back, and I will see you again soon. Hopefully not too soon, but eventually I will see you again. And it was truly, truly, truly one of the single most beautiful experiences of my life.
It sounds so comforting, and I really admire that about, different types of, I think meaning making is cool. And our dad was really big on meaning making as an oncologist, hematologist, as a medical doctor. He was really big on meaning making. And the one thing that brought me comfort all the time was that he really normalized death. He really helped me cope with just the most existential of things. And what is our biggest fear? Or I guess my biggest fear was death. And I guess he really just normalized it and made me less scared. I heard from so many people that he made others less scared and normalized it by communicating that we all die. It's not about if we're going to die, it's about when we're going to die. And life is about living, and we're here, and what are we going to do with life? What are we going to create? What are we going to make meaning of? And we worry about death when it's there, but right now while we're alive, we worry about life. And I think worrying about life is pretty hard already. Like there's so much going on with society today on a societal level, and the discrimination against minorities and marginalized and disenfranchised communities. It's a lot with COVID and with death coming up. And there's just a lot of things that cause fear and destruction. And I don't know, I felt like our dad he just knew the answers, and he made life feel safer. He made it feel okay to live. And so it's interesting that you as a patient of his, you were able to get that same experience in a way as we did as daughters, or as I'll talk for myself, as I did as a daughter. And I like that you found meaning through your Judaism classes, because that helps us live, that to find meaning and to understand. And some people feel better to know that nothing exists after life, and some people feel better knowing that something exists. So I think
I like believing that that there is something after. And I actually had the honor of being with somebody a year ago February when they passed, and one of my best girlfriends, her husband had lymphoma. And I ended up going over there the morning he died. And when I walked in the room, there was a rabbi, and he was not religious. He was more spiritual. And the rabbi was standing next to him, at the head of the bed. And I was holding his hand, and she was singing to him in Hebrew. And he went. Wow. And his wife wasn't even in the room, my girlfriend. And it was such an honor to be there. And I got to see the whole process of the hospice nurses, bathing him and pouring Dawn dishwashing liquid all over all the meds and everything.
Did you feel did you feel some sort of shift in energy?
I didn't really feel the shift in energy. It just felt like such an honor to be there. Like when he left, it was just really beautiful. And I remember he had said that he wanted to go out head first. So when they came to take him, we made sure that he had a pillow, and I think he may have had his head on a flag because they had one just in case. I'm like, I just put it there, And I made sure that he went out head first, not feet first. He said, I came in feet first and I'm leaving head first.
Wow, that's very symbolic, and it kind of just closes the circle of life.
What would you say your biggest takeaway since experiencing someone's death, experiencing other deaths in your life? What would you say your biggest takeaway is about what to do with our time here on earth not when it comes to like being of service to others, but more about being of service to yourself and validating yourself?
That's an easy one right now for me. Getting sick really, really changed me. And the joke is I really thought I was so freaking healthy. I never got colds. I never got the flu. I just had all this weird shit, right? So to find out that I have all these freaking creepy diseases, not to mention the fact because it was festering me for 53 years, pretty much like every single one of my doctors said things, I'm like the most complicated case they've ever had. So not only am I sick, I'm really sick. So I don't know that I'm going to live as long as I used to think that I was going to live. So what I would say to the masses is live your bucket list. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm living my bucket list. I went back to school. I just started, a couple weeks ago. I'm going after 2 degrees. I want to get my RN, and I found one of 2 universities in the country that offer a health coaching degree. So I'm doing that, and I'm traveling during COVID. Granted, most of it is for treatment, but guess what? I'm still having fun during my travels, and I'm not afraid. Obviously I'm taking all the precautions I have to because I live with autoimmune disease, so I'm not an idiot, but I'm not going to let this stop me from doing the things that I want to do, because the reality is none of us know how much time we have left on this earth. So live your damn bucket list. Like what Hillel says, if not now, when? And
Right.
This is the when. This is the when. Now is the when.
Right. Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. So you're really trying to fill your days with what lights you up and what brings you joy.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm taking singing lessons every Monday at 3:00 with a professional voice teacher. I was singing last Monday. She's like, those are too easy for you. I want you doing Janis Joplin. I've been singing Janis Joplin, which is freaking hard, but you know what? I'm hitting the notes. Damn it, I'm hitting the notes. And I'm really proud of myself. And you know what? It brings me joy. So whether I'm singing in the car or I'm singing to my husband, driving him nuts, the very first lesson I took with her like a month ago, we ended up spending 2 hours together instead of an hour, because of course we were talking politics and everything. And I said to her, you know what? This has been the only joy that I have felt this entire year.
Wow, that's powerful.
And just like you do the things that nurture your soul and make you happy, I guess something that I'm curious about is, what do you do during difficult times? How do you cope with difficult moments and spur of the moment stress and spur of the moment waves of sadness?
Not very well.
Please share. This is the good stuff.
I know. Damn it. God damn it. Seriously. So I also have a disease called PANS. I'm not sure if your therapist, you would know what PANS is. And,
Can you please explain what it is to the audience or to people who might not know what that is?
PANS, basically in a nutshell, is infections in the brain. Generally, it's pediatric onset. That's the P. The A, I think, is for autoimmune. The N is for neuro something. And the S is strep. So crazy enough, I still have my tonsils. I only had strep twice as a kid. And I couldn't figure out, like, well, how could I have PANS? I've not, I still have my freaking tonsils. Well, I had major oral surgery, I think last May, and they found dangerously high levels of 7 different types of strep in my jaw.
Wow.
Along with Lyme and Bartonella and Babesia and a whole host of gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. Well, my dad had rheumatic fever as a child. So if I've learned nothing from all of this, is like everything gets passed on. Everything gets passed on. So, now that I'm a health coach, like I constantly tell people we need to look at your genetics. Like before I even treat them, because they may not be able to do high-dose vitamin C.
Yeah.
They may not be able to do glutathione. So it's all really about genetics. But because of the PANS can cause symptoms like OCD or extreme rage or anxiety. And both times that my brain got very inflamed, I had massive anxiety attacks. So when something goes wrong in my life, like for example, when my friend Dawn called me when she found out that your dad passed away, I mean, I was in bed. It was my wedding anniversary. And I started screaming like, oh my God, no, like, just screaming. Yeah. And anything, when things go wrong, I get very stressed out and I can be a real bitch. And I'm a firm believer in therapy, and I don't think I've ever revealed this to you. I'm very open about it in my blogging and on my Facebook page, but I was molested for 6 years sexually, beginning at the age of 6 by my mom's best friend's husband. And I didn't tell my parents until my early 20s. So I'm back in trauma therapy because I even bought my own EMDR bar that arrived last week. So I'm going to set that up tomorrow and I'll use it for my therapy session tomorrow. So, I process and I talk it out, and I've learned how to breathe. Breathing is really everything. I'm constantly battling these infections in my brain. So because of that, it's hard for me. And I've gone through multiple bouts of clinical depression, but now knowing that there's a medical reason for it, I'm much more forgiving. I thought there was really something wrong with me, and people don't just go crazy for no reason. And one of my specialists actually is an integrative medicine doctor. She used to be a very Western medicine psychiatrist. And she truly believes that at least 80% of people with mental illness have infections in the brain. It's hard. So, the truth is I'm still on my little 0.5 milligrams of Klonopin 2 times a day. It also turns out to be a mast cell inhibitor, and I have mast cell activation syndrome, and which is really flaring these days with the fires and all the stress that we're under. So, and during a pandemic is really not the time to wean off it, but everything else that I do for mood is supplements and natural kind of, and not that there should be any stigma attached to taking antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds. And if I really felt like I needed it, that the supplements weren't working, I have my stash of Lexapro in the bathroom.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable with us and with our audience. And I think through your story, you're really showing that it's never too late to seek help when you need it.
Yeah, and it's also never too late to reassess and reflect about how can I cope with difficult times, because difficult times are part of our life experience, and we're going to have different ways of coping at different stages of our life. So thank you so much for being so open with us and honest.
Of course. And, I also have about 17 years of Al-Anon in me. And
I've been through Al-Anon.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, your dad had too. And so we kind of had that in common. When I found out that he had gone to Al-Anon meetings, I think maybe as part of his residency or internship, we spoke the same language. And what I said, like when we were in quarantine on complete lockdown those 3 months, I kept saying, you know what, this is truly the ultimate act of surrender. And everybody's hurting financially right now. Therapists have it made. It's like, I don't think psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists have ever been so busy, because we all really need help. And, it takes a lot of courage to ask for help. And I think we all need to learn how to have that courage and not be afraid. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of courage, of bravery to ask for help.
And I think that it's more normalized to go to therapy these days. And I feel like we as children had to fight to get a therapist because it was looked upon differently just as recent as maybe 15 years ago.
My first therapist was a hypnotherapist. That was the compromise my dad would make with me. Seeing a hypnotherapist when I was 16, and it was actually the daughter of one of his patients. So he was like, "Okay, she'll be in good hands." But yeah, it is really interesting. Like in my personal work as a therapist, I work with cancer patients and their loved ones in the mental health realm. And I work with other populations as well, but I am seeing a lot more of the younger population requesting therapy and their parents even being supportive of that.
It sounds like you have a very rich life, Wendei, and with all the mental health experiences, the physical health experiences you faced in relations to your childhood. And we really appreciate you being vulnerable and telling us these stories, because we feel like others need to hear it.
And I think a lot of people can relate to your story as well, because we all go through things in this life, and some of us at different stages than others, but life isn't always 100% peachy. It's not always going to be easy to go through this life experience. And that's a big reason why we have this podcast to begin with, because it's like, well, what is the meaning of life despite the bad experiences, the good experiences? How can you find your footing?
Well, and that's why I've been so open, like on Facebook or social media with my clients, with friends, is that talking about mental illness, and sadly, it's still a stigma. It's horrible. I can't believe after all these years, it's still a stigma. But I've talked about being date raped. I've talked about being molested as a child. I've talked about my marriage and the ups and downs that we go through. Can you imagine being married to somebody who has PANS? Like, that's real fun, And that's when your dad came to me. I was literally on the verge of calling an attorney because my husband was claiming that he was asymptomatic. I mean, your dad actually yelled at him one day, saying, "You really stressed her out. I had to give her some Ativan in her IV to calm her down." Thank God for him. But it just, that's why I do it, is if I can help just one person let go of their shame and talk about it and call a therapist or reach out to a friend, then I feel like I've done some good in this world.
That's beautiful. So important to help others learn how to let go of shame and not have to carry that around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. I just took a class about veterans this past summer, and I learned about the negativity bias, how negative experiences have a greater psychological impact on us than positive experiences. I found that very fascinating because we go through our negative experiences help us, shape us to be who we are, and shape us to learn more and get deeper within ourselves, and help us set boundaries, help us learn what we can accept, what we cannot accept, help us learn what we can let go of. And I guess now I'm thinking about the Al-Anon and the 12-step, the wisdom to know the difference part, the things that I cannot accept and the things that I cannot control. And so, yeah, I think that because of all of that, because negative experiences have a greater psychological impact, why isn't it normalized already? Why is there so much stigma? Why is there so much shame? So we really appreciate you coming on and telling our audience and ourselves your story to help destigmatize mental health issues.
And I think that's why I'm such a huge believer in somatic therapy as well. I mean, because I feel like I've talked out everything to death, but when you understand what somatic therapy is, which is really about being in touch with your body and knowing that you can actually rewrite the story. I remember learning many years ago from a somatic therapist that your body does not know the difference, whether or not it's something that's happening in real life or if it's something that you're reading or a movie like that old movie Jaws that I grew up with. You get the same adrenaline rush and fear just watching the movie than if you were really at the beach and saw a shark coming out of the water.
Right.
And knowing that we have the power to rewrite that and to literally get that trauma out of ourselves is huge.
Thank you so much, Wendei.
For our last question, if you have one piece of advice to give the world, especially during this time, what would it be and why?
I think more than any other time in history outside of Nazi Germany, it's really about not being selfish, thinking about others, not just you, not just your family. There's so many people that don't want to wear a mask right now because they don't think that they're going to get it or that it's a hoax. It's like, you know what? If you're not going to do it for yourself, if you're not going to do it for your family, do it for the masses, do it for the rest of the people, do it for strangers. I think now more than any time in our life, we need to think about others. We need to step outside of our little circle, step outside of our comfort, and have empathy. Think about other people. And it really is, it's learning to have empathy. And, people aren't born with it. It really is something that can be learned. And sadly, we're living during a time where we have a president who literally has zero empathy. And that's why we're here doing this, not in person and over Zoom, because there's not enough empathy in the world.
But I like what you said, that empathy can be learned. I think that's a really important thing to highlight.
Thank you so much, Wendei. And for our listeners, where can they reach you? Are you comfortable leaving your information on our podcast for them to contact you?
Well, I'll give you a couple things. So I'm a health coach. So my website for coaching is POM, like peace of mind, POM health coaching @gmail.com. And I would love for people to follow my blog, which is on medium.com, and it's called Living the Lyme Lie. So LYME. So Living the Lyme Lie. And
love the title.
Thank you. And if you're in the LA area and need skincare treatments or other health things like coaching, and we're actually putting in an open colonic system. So I'm really moving more and more to being a true wellness integrative medical center. That website would be www.peaceofmindwellness.com. And thank you so much for having me. Seriously, it is such an honor. And if there is meaning to your father's passing, it's that I just feel so grateful that I'm getting to know you.
Likewise, Wendei. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to CatharSIS, a podcast about the meaning of life.
Thank you for tuning in.
In a world where I'm a drop in the ocean, an Israeli, American, whatever, in France, to be completely happy and satisfied in my environment, all I need is one friend. 2 friends, it's a luxury. Okay, the ultimate friend is the one you open up your soul to, the one you share with, the one who actually gives you the full reaffirmation that you thirst for. Okay, we all do that. Okay, we all have the thirst for reaffirmation.